And now I have the honor of introducing our next panel moderator, Jameson Brogy, who will be the moderator for the Emerging Leaders Council panel. Jameson Brogy is a United States Marine Corps Judge Advocate. In 2021, he received the Steamboat Institute's Courage in Education Award for authoring the South Carolina REACH Act. This law requires all South Carolina college students to take a 3-credit-hour class on the U.S. Constitution, Declaration of Independence, and the Federalist Papers to graduate. He also authored the North Carolina REACH Act, which passed the North Carolina House of Representatives in March of 2023, and is pending passage in the North Carolina Senate. His views expressed here today do not represent the Marine Corps or the Department of Defense. Ladies and gentlemen, Jameson Brogy and the ELC panel.
Well, good morning, Steamboat. I'm very delighted to introduce some great leaders on the Emerging Leaders Council. And I want to say first and foremost, thank you so much for all of you who have made this program possible. It really is incredible. And I'm so grateful for it, as I know all the other members on the ELC are as well. I'm going to read their bios to introduce them before I ask them questions, so you get to know them. But before I even do that, I just want to say, describe a little bit, what is ELC? What is the Emerging Leaders Council? What does it do besides attending here and you all making that possible? Bottom line, it's a wonderful program for conservative young professionals, 18 to 30. And I just turned 30, so I'm graduating off of the program this year. I've been so grateful to be a part of it since 2019 and to introduce some of these other wonderful, great people. What Jennifer, Rick, and the Steamboat staff have put together has just really been incredible. It's not just this conference that we attend. After this conference ends, every single month we get together on a call. We talk about the different projects we're working on, input from each other. Steamboat always comes along aside us and helps us with the work that we're doing. It gives us opportunities to write blog posts about articles we're working on, participating in podcasts, helping us place articles in news sites. Steamboat has also helped each of us come up with a strategic plan of where we're trying to go in the next few years to get to where we're trying to go and preserve freedom in America. Steamboat has also hosted 2 different leadership summits in Washington, D.C., where the ELC members who attended, they got to learn about media training, public speaking, and how to be effective. Just a couple of examples I'll give. Gabriel just talked about the South Carolina REACH Act that I wrote that passed into South Carolina in 2021 that requires all college students now to take a class on America's founding documents to graduate. I couldn't have done that without Steamboat's help. I put together a lot of research for the legislators when they were considering this, but I needed a platform to help with that. Steamboat published with all that. Even here I live in North Carolina now. When I wrote the North Carolina bill that passed the House of Representatives, I can't tell how many times I spoke with Rick Aiken saying, hey, what do you think about this legislative strategy? Hey, I'm going to take a day off from work and go testify in the House. What do you think about this? Other Steamboat staff were helping me place articles about it. So those are examples of when the ELC members are working on their great projects of how how Steamboat staff has helped them do that. And again, so that's just something I want you to be aware of what the program has done and why I've been so grateful for it. So let me read a couple of the bios here. So right on the end is Calvin Blaylock. Calvin serves as the Chief of Staff at Invictus Strategies, a fundraising consulting firm that exists to help conservatives take the philanthropic lead in America. Calvin previously spent 4 years on the development leadership team at the Heritage Foundation. While there, he participated with the Vice President of Development on strategy and operations for the 50-person department. His responsibilities include executive support, talent management, donor relations, and strategic communications to 500,000 donors. Prior to his work at Heritage, Calvin served as a donor relations officer at the Leadership Institute, where he managed relationships with donors in the Northeast to fund Leadership Institute's training programs. Calvin is a graduate of the University of Missouri, where he studied business and social work. The Omicron Delta Kappa Leadership Society named him as one of the top 14 students in the university's class of 2018. He continues to participate in a multitude of fellowship programs with organizations like the Alliance Defending Freedom, Conservative Partnership Institute, Forge Leadership Network, Passages Israel, the Fund for American Studies, and much more. In his personal time, Calvin serves as a deacon of the children's ministry at Capitol Hill Baptist Church, a board member with the DC Fellowship of Christian Athletes, and is an avid flag football and volleyball player. Next right up is Anthony. Yeah, please do. Please give Calvin an applause. Anthony Jones is a PhD student and teaching assistant at Baylor University. He also does contracting work for the Texas Public Policy Foundation. In this role, he conducts research on public policy issues related to education and workforce development, assists the foundation in academic publications, educates lawmakers and members of the public on foundation research, and works to promote conservative legislation in Texas and beyond. Prior to this position, Anthony graduated from the Heritage Foundation's Young Leaders Program and he received his bachelor's degree in liberal arts from Wyoming Catholic College. As the college liaison to the Wyoming Republican Party, he also worked closely with party leadership to promote conservatism among young people in the state. Marilyn Brogy is a media effects researcher and mass communications PhD candidate in a top 5 nationally ranked advertising program at the University of Georgia. Her research examines the psychology of persuasion on social media. Marilyn's recent academic research was published in the Journal of Interactive Advertising and the Journal of Business Strategy. She recently authored a chapter in the new book, Social Media and Crisis Communication, 2nd edition. Marilyn has taught advertising courses to over 350 students at the University of Georgia. She also worked in marketing at UGA Recreational Sports for 5 years, where she was awarded top student employee at one of the largest divisions on campus. Previously, she worked as an investigative reporting intern at the #1 major market news station in the country, ABC affiliate WSB-TV Atlanta. She actively works on state-level constitutional literacy legislation. Marilyn assisted with the mass communication strategy for the passage of the South Carolina REACH Act, signed by Governor Henry McMaster in 2021. Marilyn is a proud Marine Corps wife to First Lieutenant Jameson Brogy, and that's me, by the way. All right, so I'm going to ask them several questions, but first, before I even do that, if you would just again say where you're working now and what your area of expertise is. Calvin, if you want to begin us off about your position at Invictus.
Sure, well, thank you all again for making it possible for us to be here. I truly feel like everything that I've accomplished is a result of people like you taking an interest in me and investing in what I'm doing. I'm currently serving as the Chief of Staff at Invictus Strategies, which is a new fundraising consulting firm to help conservatives take the philanthropic lead in America. We do that in a few ways. We work with nonprofits on the conservative side of the aisle, help optimize their fundraising programs, and communicate with their supporters in clear and compelling ways. We also work a lot with conservative philanthropists to direct charitable giving to the highest and best use. In the same way that you might have a financial advisor for your mutual funds and check in on the performance there, we do the same thing for people on the philanthropic side, making sure that their giving is well directed. And then we do a lot to connect those conservative groups that are doing good work with philanthropists who are interested in getting involved to help build a winning coalition on the right. As the Chief of Staff, I get to work closely with our founder and CEO, Andrew McIndoe. He and I worked together for years at the Heritage Foundation and get to continue that now. I wear all kinds of hats, everything from speech writing to scheduling to talent management to event planning to managing relationships with board members and clients and donors, and every day brings something new, but it's a fun challenge, and I've really enjoyed what I've done at Invictus so far.
Anthony?
Yeah, thank you all again. I'll echo Calvin's appreciation for everything that you do to make it possible for people like me to be here today. I was here a couple years ago, and I'm happy to be back. I am currently at Baylor University. I probably share sentiments with a lot of you that there's a lot of problems in higher education right now, and in some ways, academia is overrated, but some universities are doing really good things, and Baylor is one of them, and I'm proud to be there. And what I do there as a student in the PhD program, I'm learning from the greatest minds in the history of Western civilization who've thought really important things about politics. We heard earlier today from Robert about Thucydides and the lessons he had to teach us today in terms of national security policy. And there's so many rich lessons to draw from the past. And you all know that if we don't learn from the past, we're doomed to repeat the mistakes. So I'm glad to be able to be learning in that program, and then I'm also, as was mentioned, at the Texas Public Policy Foundation. My friend Kevin Roberts, who we heard from yesterday, brought me on there a few years ago to work on education policy, and that consists of two things. Number one, identifying the problems that currently exist in Texas education, and then trying to figure out how we can solve those through legislation, through reaching out to parents across the state, figuring out what their needs are. And what we're doing right now is the parent empowerment movement, we're calling it. That's what you all see across the nation. It's going like spreading like a wildfire. And it's particularly in Texas. It's a conservative state, but surprisingly, it's a little behind the curve in terms of education policy that gives flexibility to parents and transparency to enable them to give the education that's best for their child. So that's what I'm working on. I've spent the whole summer doing contracting work for them, writing a paper. It's about to be published on the foundations of parental rights in education, looking at it from both a philosophical perspective, but then also the legal jurisprudence. I was surprised to find court decision after court decision from both the U.S. Supreme Court and the Texas Supreme Court reaffirming the fundamental right and primary right of parents to care for and educate their children. So I'm trying to get that out there, and especially ahead of this fall, because I don't know if you all have heard, in Texas, we were trying this past legislative session in the spring to pass an education savings account bill that would give parents more flexibility in their educations, but it didn't make it out of committee. So Governor Abbott has insisted that he's going to continue to call special legislative sessions month after month until they produce a bill that gives parents greater flexibility. And so that's going to start happening this fall, and so I'm working on this paper trying to get it out as soon as possible to both for legislators and for parents to ensure that we can increase good education policy in Texas.
Good news. That's great news. Give me a show of hands if you have a social media account or multiple. So do I, and right now I use persuasion theory to examine what happens to our brains when we're on our social media accounts. And I specifically study advertisements that don't look like advertisements. They're covert, and they're called native advertisements. And so I like to see, what do our brains do, what are the effects of that, and what kind of behaviors do these advertisements lead to, which is very important right now in our country and with all the issues going on that are being communicated on social media.
All right. So I have a couple questions I'm going to ask them. If you'd like to ask some particular questions, the QR code on the table, you can use that to scan in to submit questions. I see I got one here. I'll get to you in a second, so please submit questions. So the first question that I have prepared is, and I'll ask Calvin here. So how has involvement with the Emerging Leaders Council impacted you personally and professionally?
Yeah, I've greatly benefited from my involvement in the Steamboat ELC. There's a joke in Washington that if you want a friend, then you'll have to get a dog. And as much as I like dogs, friends and actual community are even better. I think community is the solution to a lot of the big problems that I face living in DC. You've got a ton of obstacles from the left that inhibit progress on different policy issues. We've got a lot of good allies on our side, but we have other allies who are a little bit too complacent. And then a lot of internal temptations in the city that threaten to get you to cut corners on your principles in order to get ahead. And I think when you have good community, it provides solutions along each of those lines. So rather than feeling like I have to go it alone and try and pass good policy by myself, the ELC has provided a really great cohort of friends who are all interested in thinking through these issues together and making the right kind of change. When I feel like allies are a little bit too complacent, the ELC has been another great outlet of people who are not in it for themselves, but who are really driven and want to go out and make actual change in the political process and in their communities. And then the ELC has provided great accountability. So people who I know are going to hold me to a high standard, who I've got regular calls and meetings with, and are committed to living out the same principles. So a good example, our friend and fellow ELC member, Lauren McCarthy, who couldn't be here today. I remember an ELC dinner a few months ago where I was able to sit down and ask her I'm thinking about this new job. What do you think about some of the organizations in this network? What do you think about some of the leaders of those organizations? What do you think about making this change? And her advice was part of giving me the confidence to take that leap, join a startup like Invictus, and I think the ELC consistently provides opportunities like that for us to run ideas past each other and know that we have a group of friends who can help us get where we want to be.
Thank you, Calvin. To Anthony, for you as well, how's your involvement with ELC impacted you?
Yeah, thank you, Jameson. Jameson mentioned a few minutes ago that the ELC has leadership summits that it puts on for the members. And I went to one of those summits, and we got media training there, which was invaluable, as I'll explain. But they trained us to figure out how to best present ourselves through argument, through persuasion, to convince people from all different backgrounds, to identify our audience, and then to make sure that we were conveying the message in the best way possible. And so I was tasked with writing an op-ed on the homeschooling boom that's happened in America over the past few years. Some of you may have homeschooled or know people that have turned to homeschooling, especially in light of COVID and the lockdowns. But I was trying to get out some of the facts that I thought really needed to be shared. For example, the number of homeschooling families across America doubled from the beginning of 2020 to the end of 2020. And the number of African American households that were homeschooling increased more than 5-fold over that same period, the beginning of 2020 to the end of 2020. And at the same time, from 2019 to 2020, there was a 3% decrease in the number of students that were going to public school. So these were important facts telling a narrative about the educational landscape across America and how parents are dissatisfied with the kind of educations that their children were receiving in the public schools. So I thought back to that media training that I received, and it was very helpful in helping me identify who is my audience, both legislative staff and parents across the nation, particularly in Texas. That was where the focus of my article was. And thinking through how do I appeal to both of those stakeholders involved, but also in a way that draws in audiences that are both sympathetic to the homeschooling movement, but also a little more doubtful that it's the right way to go. And so I tailored my argument. I organized my op-ed in such a way that it would accomplish those things, and I was grateful to have it published in several media outlets, thanks to the training that I received from the ELC Leadership Summit. So that's just one way out of many that it's benefited me and the work that I do.
I'll share personally and professionally how the Emerging Leaders Council at Steamboat has helped me. And to start personally, as a persuasion student, a student studying persuasion, I took 2 or 3 courses on the persuasion of climate change. You take courses in professors' area of expertise, and the University of Georgia has professors who focus on how to make the climate change movement persuasive. And so I took those courses, and in those courses, came in with the conservative viewpoint, and in the middle of being in a very persuasive environment, just had a lot of questions that I couldn't get answered, that there weren't enough conservative resources out there. And the Steamboat Institute, through the Campus Liberty Tour debates, has given me access to conservative scholars and schools of thought that I would not have received in the setting that I was in, and have solidified my viewpoints, and has just given me a whole picture that I was missing. And so now I feel clarity on the issue in my personal life, and it's nice to have that resolved. Professionally, I agree. Professionally, through the Emerging Leaders Council, I've been paired with a mentor who has really, really helped my professional growth. And every month we get to hear from speakers on a Zoom call who many of them have specialized in media, and to just hear directly from practitioners, especially being in academia, has just been very, very valuable to me professionally.
Well, thank you very much, and I'm glad you mentioned the mentor thing. I think I forgot to mention that earlier. When they were helping us, when Steamboat was helping the ELC members come up with a strategic plan, we're also paired with mentors, and that's just really been incredible. Speak to someone a couple times a month who's ahead of you in your career, and that's really been invaluable. Thank you for submitting questions. We got a lot of questions that have come in, so we got about 7 minutes left. So let me ask you each this question. What are the top issues in society that you are concerned about, and how has Steamboat equipped you to address these issues? Calvin?
I think one of the most important issues for me is the role of philanthropy and civil society in America, especially compared to the role of government in America. Because what we see is that when government grows, civil society is kind of taken out of the picture. And when civil society grows, when we're serving our neighbors, involved in our communities, then it creates less of a need for government programs in the first place. I think Americans get this to a large extent. I mean, people give $500 billion every year to charities, which is incredible. I mean, it's more than some countries' entire GDP. But the philanthropy of the left looks very different from the philanthropy of the right. I mean, you look at the philanthropy of the left, and they're out fundraising the top 50 organizations on the right by a scale of 4 to 1. You think about organizations like Arabella Advisors, the groups that they're consulting for, doing $1 billion a year in grant making. And then you think about the philanthropy of the right. I heard a story about a gentleman named Kenneth Griffin. I don't know very much about Mr. Griffin and his character. I just know that in April of this year, 2023, he gave a $300 million gift to Harvard University. Mr. Griffin is a man who loves the Constitution. He bought one of the original copies. He supports law enforcement. He says that he has a disdain for identity politics. And yet, in total, he's given $500 million to an organization that is by no means sympathetic to conservative values. And I just imagine what it would have looked like for him to go to 500 conservative organizations like Steamboat with $1 million check each. What kind of difference that would have made to our movement? I think conservative philanthropists need to start having that kind of perspective. That's why it's been so encouraging to get involved in groups like Steamboat and the ELC, to meet people who are much more regular and collaborative and thoughtful and generous about their giving, to make programs like this possible. And I think the more that we are thoughtful about our giving and the role of civil society in America, the better off we're going to be as a movement. So that's one of the issues that I care a lot about.
And I'll just briefly say that I think education really is such an important issue that needs to be talked about more. And there's a great Ronald Reagan quote. He said that as the family goes, so goes our civilization. And that we're seeing that increasingly true today as the family is trying to be ripped apart by those who would seek to do it harm. And the incredible thing is that the education movement that I was talking about before, this parent empowerment movement, it's not starting from the think tanks, the places where I work. It's starting from the grassroots levels, the parents who are recognizing that their children are not receiving what they ought to in their schools. And so the ELC is giving me a capacity to think more from a grassroots level, because we're connected with other ELC members from all over the country who are working in a variety of fields. It's that local small town mentality that I think is really where change is going to happen, especially in the education realm, but also in all policy aspects that we're concerned about.
There are a lot of issues facing our country today, and I would argue that underlying thread under all of them is that our leaders are communicating them about those issues to us on social media, and we as consumers are making decisions about how we're going to act on these issues. And so Steamboat, as a think tank, has allowed me to publish articles about persuasion on social media, how consumers can protect themselves, and how these media companies can still be free to make the decisions that they need to make as a media company. And so I'm really grateful to Steamboat for giving me that platform and just pushing this free thought that we can have.
One of our submitted questions, this one says directly to you, Calvin. It says, what has been the most rewarding aspect of working with the Fellowship of Christian Athletes, and what's a message you'd give to the wokeness going on with students and athletics in the nation? It seems pretty relevant, from what we just heard a moment ago with Riley Gaines.
Yeah, I would say my faith informs the way that I live my life and the way that I engage in politics. I mean, I think about something like 1 Timothy 2. It says that we should be concerned with our political leaders, that we should live peaceful, quiet lives, godly and dignified in every way. I think that's a great way to think about the political world, that the end of it is just to give people in America the chance to lead peaceful and quiet lives, to have the freedom to decide what's best for their lives. FCA has been one of the ways that I've been involved in my community as a board member. It's been interesting, given that recently DC Public Schools has tried to stop us from meeting at public schools and said that Christian organizations are antithetical to their values. But at the end of the day, as we saw with Riley's story and so many others, you often don't control what happens to you, but you always control how you respond. So I think one of the other ways that my faith influences the way that I conduct myself in the political sphere, the book of Galatians says, don't grow weary in doing good, but continue to work hard knowing that you'll produce a harvest of righteousness in the end. I think that's something great that we can all learn from, that no matter what obstacles you face, you can't always take it personally. It's not always in your control, but all that we can do is stay positive, do the best that we can, and trust that things will work out in the end.
Thank you. All right, we have 30 seconds left. If you'd each spend 10 seconds, what gives you hope for the future of America? Maybe Marilyn, you want to start us off?
Yes, we will all leave here and make small decisions and large decisions for our families and our companies and our local communities that will either push conservative values forward or, just sit on the bench and watch things happen. And so I really believe that everyone in here is going to take this weekend and go home and make those decisions and make the right decisions, and that gives me hope.
Anthony?
What gives me hope is that my generation, Generation Z, is actually the most pro-life generation, according to recent polls. And that's extremely encouraging. Let's get a round of applause for that, please. And so there's a lot of potential in Gen Z, but we need people like you to look around at the young people in your lives who you think have potential to make a difference and encourage them to step up and to do so. That's what got me to the place that I am today. Someone in my life told me to do that. So keep doing that, and I'm sure many of you have, but it really makes a difference. So thank you.
I'm encouraged by people like you, events like this, groups like the Emerging Leaders Council. It's so great to know that I have a network to lean on of people who are not always like me, living in DC, working in politics, but people who live all around the nation who oftentimes are behind enemy lines, working in the corporate sector, or as a teacher, or as a software developer, or as a beekeeper, and to know that all of these people, regardless of what institution they're in, are standing for the same principles and values, and that there are a lot more people working together for the same end than we might realize. So that's really encouraging to me.
Thank you so much all for making this possible. So grateful. And please give a round of applause for 3 great leaders.